In pop culture, armored victory belongs to whoever builds the biggest, most heavily armed machine possible. But a fortress on tracks is useless if it is swallowed by the mud before it ever reaches the fight. During World War II, the United States operated under a brutal logistical ceiling. Fighting a multi-front war across oceans meant every vehicle had to be lifted by crane, loaded onto a transport ship, and ferried across thousands of miles of water. Resources and cargo space were finite. This forced engineers to operate within the physical constraints of the iron triangle of armor. This engineering principle dictates that speed, armor, and firepower constantly compete for a vehicle's limited weight capacity. Adding an extra inch of steel plate to protect the crew dramatically increases the vehicle's total weight. This immediately overtaxes the engine and compromises mobility. Similarly, mounting a larger, more lethal main gun requires a heavier, wider turret. This forces the chassis to grow, further killing speed and limiting how many units can fit on a cargo ship. Because maximizing all three traits simultaneously is physically impossible, the U.S. military abandoned the pursuit of one perfect tank in favor of a specialized, diverse toolkit. Success depended on matching these specific, intentional flaws to the exact battlefield hurdles they were designed to overcome. The primary constraint for American armor was weight. Global supply lines meant that whatever rolled off a Detroit assembly line had to safely cross the Atlantic or Pacific on a standardized transport. Early in the war, the M3 Lee served as a temporary compromise. The U.S. needed a heavy gun immediately, but lacked a turret ring wide enough to hold it, so they mounted the main gun low in the hull, limiting its arc of fire. This compromise bought time to evolve the medium tank philosophy, a strict balance of moderate armor, mobility, and firepower. The M4 Sherman prioritized reliability and rapid mass production over winning individual one-on-one duels. Its true strategic strength lay in its standardized parts and ease of repair in the field. This high-volume approach stood in contrast to heavy tank doctrine, which traded away mobility to prioritize raw armor and the firepower needed to break static enemy defenses. The experimental M6 heavy tank illustrates the logistical failure of this approach. Its massive size made it heavily armed, but practically useless for the reality of mobile overseas battlefield movements. It never saw combat. Late in the war, the M26 Pershing finally successfully fielded a 90mm gun and wide tracks to challenge German armor. However, its immense weight meant it could only reach the front in small numbers. Heavy tanks dominate isolated tactical duels, but the easily produced medium tank yielded the strategic return on investment required to win a global war. In certain scenarios, the weight of heavy armor becomes a fatal liability. The M3 Stuart represents the light tank class. Engineers stripped away heavy steel to maximize speed for scouting and infantry support, leaving it with a compact frame and a relatively tiny main gun. While the Stuart could outrun almost anything, its high-speed design left the crew highly vulnerable if ambushed by true enemy armor. To counter heavy German panzers without overloading transport ships, the U.S. developed the tank destroyer doctrine. This prioritized hunting and outmaneuvering the enemy rather than trading blows. The M10 Wolverine mounted a lethal gun on a stripped-down chassis, providing the velocity necessary to flank heavy tanks and strike their weak points. Fielding these massive guns on light frames required an extreme trade-off. This tank destroyer in an urban setting reveals the result, an open-topped turret that left the crew visible and exposed. By removing the roof entirely, the M18 Hellcat became the fastest armored vehicle of the war, relying purely on velocity to survive the battlefield. This lack of overhead protection was a fatal vulnerability. These vehicles were easily destroyed by overhead artillery bursts or basic infantry tactics from above. Optimizing entirely for speed creates a glass cannon that requires perfect tactical execution and the element of surprise to avoid total destruction. Standard combat tanks are often neutralized by extreme geographic barriers or heavily fortified concrete bunkers. To bypass these hurdles, the military utilized specialized support armor, modifying the reliable medium tank chassis for permanent niche tasks. Island hopping required clearing entrenched defenders. Replacing standard guns with flamethrowers allowed tanks to project a devastating arc of fire directly into bunkers. Armored thrusts required artillery that could keep pace. The M7 Priest mounted large artillery directly onto a tracked chassis to provide mobile, indirect fire support. When columns took damage, specialized recovery vehicles used heavy cranes to pull disabled tanks from the debris, keeping the unit operational under fire. These vehicles solve massive operational nightmares, but their specialized gear makes them highly vulnerable dead weight in a standard combat engagement. True military power lies in modular logistical capacity, the ability to overcome the physical friction of the battlefield through specialized variety. This presented a monumental challenge for a WW2 commander. With every vehicle carrying a fatal flaw, how do you deploy the right armor for the mission? You utilize a tactical decision tree, mapping the U.S. arsenal to the immediate physical hurdle. If the objective is intelligence gathering and screening infantry, you accept the vulnerability of thin armor and deploy light tanks for their speed. If superior enemy armor threatens the line, you accept the risk of an open turret and deploy tank destroyers to hunt them down. To shatter heavily fortified defenses, you pay the logistical cost to bring up your heavy tanks. For sustained, versatile operations, you rely on the strategic volume and standardization of the medium tank. Strategic standardization provided the U.S. commander with a specialized tool for every scenario, overcoming battlefield friction through logistics rather than invincibility.